Hey family, welcome back to my video. Today we will see, what if Lord Voldemort obsessed with Harry Potter? Before we start, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the original author of this story for granting us permission to use it in our YouTube video. Your generosity is greatly appreciated. The author's creation and the original stories link in the descriptions. Please do check that first. Now enjoy the video. Harry stared at the man whom he had trusted in shock. A feeling of betrayal swept through him as he was told of what he had done to end the war with Voldemort. Dumbledore didn't look the least bit regretful over his actions, only sealing the betrayal. Voldemort had just been returned to his body and had grown to full strength once more. The 16-year-old had seen it for himself at the graveyard 2 years prior. The form had been remarkably human and young, with Voldemort looking to be 16. The only difference from Tom Riddle had been the blood-red eyes. Harry knew that Dumbledore would do anything to end the war, but he still had not expected to be handed over to the Dark Lord so easily. Yet, the Light Lord had offered him up as a peace offering as soon as Voldemort had proven his return to the public. The headmaster hadn't waited to hear if Voldemort had other demands before offering Harry to him. Harry didn't have any further time to react before his wand was taken and snapped and he was forced to take a portkey. He felt the familiar sensation of the magical form of travel and decided it was his least favorite method of travel in the magical world. When the sickening sensation stopped, Harry was standing in the entry hall to a large castle. In front of him was Voldemort, looking just as human as he did in the graveyard that night. Harry stared at him blankly, unable to truly feel anything but betrayal. He knew there were several ways this would go, and none of them were good for him. First, Voldemort would kill him. After all, Harry was the cause of so many problems for the man. He was of no real use as a slave, considering that Voldemort had house elves and plenty of followers. Or, perhaps, he wouldn't kill him quite yet. It was also very likely that Voldemort would torture him first. Harry wasn't rooting for that option, but he considered it to be a valid possibility. Another one was that the Dark Lord would keep him as some kind of trophy. Many had tried to defeat Harry, yet none had succeeded. Being able to gloat that he had Harry in his clutches would surely appeal to the Dark Lord. Finally, Harry thought that perhaps he would simply treat Harry as what he was, a slave. Harry supposed it wouldn't be too different from living with the Dursleys, except this time he would have no escape to Hogwarts. Voldemort smirked and stalked closer to him, tilting his head upwards with one long finger under his chin. "Do you know why you are here?" he asked in what Harry could only describe as a gentle tone. "I have been given to you as an offering," Harry said monotonously, not able to put any emotions into his voice at the moment. The Dark Lord nodded. "Follow me," he ordered before walking away. Obediently, Harry followed. He knew better than to try and escape. He had tried that once with the Dursleys and he had learned from his mistake. The punishment he had been given when he was caught was awful. Voldemort led Harry through the halls until they reached a door, which he stopped at and opened, stepping inside with a satisfied smirk. Harry followed him inside, wondering what it was. It was a large bedroom with several doors leading other places. The bedroom was richly furnished and well decorated. Petunia would have been jealous of it, for sure. "This will be your room," Voldemort said, causing shock to run through Harry. "Only Mizzy and I have access to it for now, so you don't need to worry about anyone else coming in." Deciding not to argue, Harry dipped his head submissively. "Yes, my lord," he murmured. Voldemort sighed and walked to one of the doors, opening it to reveal a giant walk-in closet with several ETS of robes inside. He looked at Harry before taking down a set of silk sleep clothes and handing them to him. "Change. I will not have you wearing that filthy uniform." Harry felt his hands shake as he hurriedly changed. He hadn't been given permission to use the closet to do so, so he had to change in front of him. He was about to pull on the new clothes when Voldemort stopped him, fury in his crimson eyes. "Who did this to you?" he demanded. Harry knew what he was talking about instantly. Scars littered his body and he was too skinny to be healthy. "My aunt and uncle," he whispered, knowing better than to lie to his new master. Voldemort hissed angrily and gestured for Harry to continue dressing. After he was dressed, Harry stood with his head bowed, waiting to be hit or ordered to do something. "Is Harry your full name?" Harry worked hard to keep the surprise at such a question off of his face. "No, sir," he admitted. "Well then, what is?" "Hadrian, sir." Voldemort hummed. "Your name is Hades now. Much more distinguished." Hades found that he rather liked the name. It suited him much better than Harry ever had. He nodded obediently. "Yes, my lord." Voldemort once more tilted Hades's head upwards. "You are mine now, Hades," he murmured, a possessive gleam in his red eyes. "No one else is allowed to touch you in any way without my permission. Do I make myself clear?" Hades felt like crying, but he just whispered a small, "Yes, my lord." "Good." With that, his new master swept from the room, closing the door behind him. Hades felt a tear slip from his eye as the reality of the situation hit him in full. He was fully at the mercy of the man who had tried very hard to kill him in the past and whom he had been told was cruel and heartless. He had no escape and no one was coming to save him. Harry cautiously eyed the bed before climbing under the covers and curling up into a ball to cry. The bed was more comfortable than anything he had ever felt, and he soon found himself drifting to sleep. Chapter 2. When Hades woke the next morning, there was a tray of food set up on a small table beside his bed. Hades knew better than to touch it, having experienced similar tests with the Dursleys. He knew from experience that even if food was set in his room, he must wait for permission to eat. He sat in his bed for a while, waiting for Voldemort or Mizzy to come and either give him permission to eat the food or take it away. When Voldemort did enter, Hades watched his brow furrow when he saw the untouched tray of food. "Why have you not eaten?" he asked. "I would rather not be punished," Hades mumbled. "I have done nothing to earn it and was not given permission to eat." Voldemort frowned. "You believed I would deprive you of food and water?" Hades stiffened at the disapproving tone of his voice. "Yes, my lord." "Why?" Hades kept his gaze fixed on his hands. "It is only right," he said. "I have done nothing to deserve it and I am only a slave." Hades felt the bed dip and assumed that the Dark Lord had sat down beside him. "Look at me, Hades." Hades slowly raised his head to meet his master's eyes. He was looking at him with a small frown. "You are no slave, Hades." "A prize then? A trophy to brag about?" "No." Hades's eyes widened and he combed through his theories. Nothing he had thought of matched with what Voldemort had done and said so far. He hadn't been tortured or killed, so it wasn't revenge. Voldemort had dismissed the other two theories. He wanted to ask what exactly he was, but he knew better. He had no wish to experience a Crucio anytime soon. Despite holding his tongue, it seemed the Dark Lord knew exactly what he was thinking because he answered Hades's unspoken question. "You are to be my queen." Hades jolted in surprise. That was the last thing he was expecting. He searched the man's face for any sign that he was lying or joking. There was none. "If I may ask, my lord, why?" "Handsome, intelligent, and powerful. You are perfect in every way." Hades frowned. He made sure to hide his intelligence at Hogwarts, so how did the Dark Lord know? What else did he know about Hades? Did he know that the Hat had wanted Hades in Slytherin? Did he know that his affiliation was not light, but was actually neutral? Furthermore, he couldn't help but disagree with his other assessments. He was too skinny and scrawny and scarred to be handsome. His only redeeming quality was his emerald green eyes that he had been told were exotic. He was not nearly as powerful as Voldemort seemed to think. He couldn't even stand up to his Muggle relatives. Hades looked into his blood-red eyes. "You could have anyone you want," he whispered. The Dark Lord was powerful, handsome, and respected. He had his pick of any dark witch or wizard. Voldemort smirked. "I could, yes." Hades shook his head when it seemed his master didn't understand that he deserved better than Hades. "You are a lord of magic. You deserve someone worthy of that honor. I am not handsome or powerful. I am scarred and weak." Voldemort softly cupped his cheek in his hand. "Don't think such thoughts, my queen. You are beautiful and those muggles will pay for what they have done to you. Hades decided against arguing with him, despite not believing a word of what he said. He was still as ugly as ever and there was no way that someone as powerful as Voldemort would ever waste time avenging someone as weak as him. Yes, my lord, he murmured quietly. He was a slave, no matter what Voldemort said. If his master wanted him to be his queen, he would do as told and would wait for him to realize his mistake. Voldemort sighed. You will call me Tom, he said. You are to be my queen, not a follower. Hades nodded mutely. He had thought that Tom hated his name, but here he was, ordering him to refer to him as such. Eat it all, Tom said, placing the tray of food in Hades's lap. You will never be denied food or drink here. As Hades slowly ate, Tom continued to speak. As my queen, you are to have a manservant. I have chosen one for you. His name is Blaise Zabini. Hades recalled that Blaise was one of the few Slytherins that didn't openly hate him. He nodded and slowly ate, trying not to get sick while doing so. There was more food on the plate than he'd ever eaten in one sitting. Blaise will start today, Tom said. I will give you a while to settle in. Before introducing you to my followers as my queen. Tom swept out of the room, closing the door behind him. Hades did manage to finish all the food, as he was told, but he almost immediately had to run to the connected restroom to throw up. He was still emptying the contents of his stomach when Blaise showed up. He must have heard the retching because the dark-skinned teen was by his side in an instant, soothingly rubbing his back. Hades's eyes went wide and he jerked away from the touch. Don't touch me, he yelped. He didn't want Blaise to get hurt. Blaise raised his hands in surrender. I got permission, he said gently. I won't be punished. Hades relaxed. Oh, okay, he muttered. He winced as he flushed the former contents of his stomach down the toilet. Sorry. Blaise shook his head with a soft smile. There's nothing to be sorry for. Are you bulimic? He quickly shook his head. No, I'm just malnourished. Tom told me to eat everything on my plate but my stomach couldn't handle it. I suppose it happens a lot. Malnourished? Blaise asked, sounding concerned and confused. Hades looked down, feeling ashamed. My aunt and uncle didn't like me, he said quietly. Does the Dark Lord know? Blaise asked. Hades fiddled with the hem of his robes before shrugging. He saw me without a shirt on, he whispered. He probably figured it out. With a frown, Blaise nodded. Tell me everything. So, Hades did. He didn't know why, but he trusted Blaise almost as much as he trusted Draco. He told him all about how his uncle beat him and his aunt starved him. He told him about how he was treated worse than a house elf. He told him about how his cousin was kind to him and how he and his friends protected Hades as best they could. How they gave him food at school and treated his wounds. When he was done, Blaise was silently fuming. Abuse wasn't necessarily unheard of in the wizarding world, but it certainly was less common than in the Muggle world, and it was never so bad as what Hades was describing. Blaise was glad that Dudley had helped Hades. Blaise took several deep breaths before he was able to calm down and check the time. All right, he said. I'll talk to the Dark Lord about this if you want, but you need to get ready. The seamstress will be here in an hour. Hades's eyes widened and he hurried through his hygiene routine while Blaise picked out a set of robes for him to wear. They were charcoal with black stitching and looked very nice on Hades, much to his surprise. When the seamstress arrived, Hades was given a half mask to wear. It was made of silver and was simple, yet elegant. Emeralds and black gems were embedded into it in swirls. When Harry put it on, he could see even better than with his glasses. The seamstress took his measurements and tested fabrics against his skin, before nodding and leaving, promising to have the wardrobe ready in a few days. The whole thing took several hours and Hades was tired by the time it was over. However, he still had things to do, apparently. You need to learn how to act like a pureblood, Blaise said. I'm going to teach you. So, Hades was put through lessons in proper posture that day. He was also given a book on traditions that he was instructed to read in his spare time. The book turned out to be interesting, much to Hades's pleasure. He loved to read, even with the incorrect prescription of his glasses, but he had no patience for boring books. If he wasn't interested in the content, he wouldn't read the book unless required. Chapter 3. It had been a month since Hades had arrived at Slytherin Castle, and he was starting to get into a routine. Every morning at 6, he woke up and got ready for the day. At 7, he would eat breakfast and drink a nutrients potion, which was correcting the damage of years of malnourishment. At 8, he began his etiquette lessons. At noon, they would stop for lunch. After lunch, Hades was free until dinner, when Tom would join him. Hades found that Blaise was perfect for his job. He knew more about fashion than Hades ever could and dealt with all of his issues with ease and understanding. He set up an appointment with an eye healer, who gave Hades a potion that healed his eyes fully. At first, Hades had been reluctant to let Blaise help him much, but soon it was proved that Blaise loved the job. Not only was he of a higher rank than most of the dark sect, but he also got to order around the house elves and was free from any punishment or orders unless it came from Hades or Tom. In his free time, Hades took up several hobbies. He read all the books in his study, which was a lot. He started learning how to paint and draw and learned he was very good at all forms of arts and crafts. So, he took that up, sending Blaise for supplies. He also meditated, learning to feel his magic, even though he can't use it without his wand. Hades had yet to leave his suite, but he didn't mind much. He had learned that easy friendship was a hoax and trust was for fools. Human contact was not on his agenda anytime soon. Other than Blaise, of course. Blaise had become Hades's only source of support. He considered him a friend and a confidant. He trusted Blaise and told him everything. Blaise knew him better than anyone because of that. Well, almost anyone. There were a few people Hades missed dearly. He missed his godfathers, Remus and Sirius. He missed his little godson, Teddy. He missed the twins, who were like older brothers to him. He missed Draco, who was like his little brother. Yes, these people he knew would never betray him like Dumbledore had. Hades hadn't seen Tom since he'd arrived, and for that, he was thankful. He needed time to sort out how he felt about his situation, and having Tom around didn't help matters. Honestly, he didn't mind living in Slytherin Castle. He enjoyed not having to worry about the bloody war or killing Voldemort or being killed somehow. He felt safe and comfortable. He was able to explore what he liked to do. He was able to learn what he wanted to learn. Hades. Blaise popped his head into the room and smiled when he saw Hades look up from his book on elven culture. Yes, Blaise? Hades asked. You need to get changed, Blaise said. The Dark Lord is coming to visit you today. Hades tensed immediately and set his book aside after marking the page. He was wearing casual black robes that, while they looked nice, were not suitable for meeting with Tom. Blaise had drilled it into his head that he needed to look impeccable when he meets with his king. Yes, Hades had accepted that he was going to be his queen. He had accepted that, while he would always be seen as less than, Tom did truly want him. He couldn't fathom the reason, but the longer he was treated well, the more cemented the idea became. Blaise went about picking out Hades's best robes and handing them to him. He chose green robes with golden accents. Hades dressed quickly and allowed Blaise to style his hair, which worked wonders. His hair was now neat and not messy as usual. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Blaise quickly left to his own chambers as Hades called out a quiet, "Enter." The door opened to reveal the 18-year-old Tom Riddle, wearing all black robes. He swept into the room and his eyes roamed over Hades's form before he smirked in satisfaction. "Good afternoon, my queen," he murmured, stepping close and gently caressing his cheek. "Good afternoon, my king," Hades returned, not flinching away from the soft touch as he would have a month ago. It was comforting, as much as he hated to admit it. "Why have you come to visit me?" "Am I not allowed to visit my queen?" Tom asked, quirking a single brow. "Of course, Tom," Hades said. "I merely do not believe it is like you to do anything without a reason." Tom nodded his head in agreement. "Very true. I believe it is time for you to meet my followers. However, first, I have a gift." From the sleeve of his robe, Tom withdrew an unfamiliar, yet beautiful, wand. Hades could feel the magic thrumming through it, connecting with his own better than his wand ever had. He felt the urge to reach out and grab hold of it, but held himself back. The wand was made of a dark wood and had small emeralds embedded in the handle, which was carved with runic designs. It was about 11 inches long and seemed nice and flexible. 11 inches, ebony wood with a basilisk venom core, Tom said with a smirk, clearly seeing Hades's reaction to the wand. Emeralds to symbolize power and help conduct dark magic easier than light. Blaze informed me that your former wand was snapped by the old man. You're giving me back my magic? Hades asked with wide eyes. There is one condition to this, Tom cautioned. You will learn dark magic and you will train with me. I will not have you defenseless. Hades didn't hesitate to nod. His core was neutral, but his affiliation had always been dark. He simply hadn't known until he started learning about the dark rituals. When he held the wand, he felt himself fully relax. He connected with it so well that he felt like crying in joy. He held it up and said, Lumos, causing the tip to light up. He extinguished the light soon after and looked up at Tom gratefully. Good, Tom said, satisfied. Now, you need to learn how to defend yourself before the meeting tonight. I suggest learning a few torture curses to prove your worth. Hades didn't want to hurt anyone, but he agreed to learn the spells, as that was the deal for having a wand again. He learned the Cruciatus curse, the blood-boiling curse, the bone-breaking curse, and the cutting curse. Finally, it was time for the meeting. Tom provided Hades with a holster for his new wand and led him out of his rooms after Hades had put on his mask. When they got to the throne room, Tom put on a glamour that made him more snake-like. He then entered, with Hades following behind. Tom sat in the main throne, while Hades sat gracefully on the throne to his right. The Queen's throne. He looked down at the gathered followers and had to withhold a scowl when he saw Wormtail. My followers, Tom said, as I'm sure you have noticed, I have chosen my queen. Hades held his head high as all eyes turned to him. He would not show that weakness. You will treat him with the utmost respect. Any attempts to harm him will end in severe punishment. If you touch him, you will die painfully. You will address him as Queen Hades. Yes, my lord, came the unified response. Good. Now, all except my inner circle, leave. Most of the room quickly left, leaving only Lucius Malfoy, Thaddeus Nott, Bellatrix Lestrange, the Lestrange brothers, Severus Snape, Antonin Dolohov, Barty Crouch Jr., Fenrir Greyback, Corbin Yaxley, and the Carrows. Tom dropped his glamour and smirked. Report, Lucius, he ordered. The meeting was short, but Hades could feel eyes on him the whole time. He glared at the werewolf, who was the worst, staring at him with a mixture of lust and respect. Lucius Malfoy was also staring at him, though more with curiosity. When the meeting was over, Lucius stayed behind while everyone else left. My lord, if I may, he began. When Tom gestured for him to continue, he said, My son has been looking to join your ranks. He is powerful and intelligent and would serve you well. Hades saw Tom nod thoughtfully. Bring him here, he ordered. I would meet him before making my decision. Lucius bowed before leaving, returning shortly after with Draco, who bowed low to both Hades and Tom. Hades looked at Tom as he stood and approached Draco. Rise, he ordered. When Draco had risen, Hades saw a flash of sadness and recognition in Tom's crimson eyes. You look just like your grandfather, he said. You wish for a place in the dark? Yes, my lord. Then, you will be my successor, Tom decided. I will train you personally and you will stay here at the castle. Draco's eyes were wide as he nodded. Yes, my lord. I would be honored, my lord. Go pack your things. I expect you here tomorrow morning. Draco and Lucius bowed lowly and left quickly. Chapter 4. After escorting Hades to his rooms, Tom left to his study to think. While he hated to admit to not knowing things, Tom knew he didn't have a clue how to approach the situation. He obviously couldn't just force Hades to love him. He had never been in a relationship before and had no clue where to start. This led to him grudgingly deciding to ask someone for advice. Lucius, How does one court another? Lucius, who had simply come to drop off a report before his raid, froze at the question. "Oh Merlin," he muttered. "Have you never courted before?" Tom shook his head. "The first step in courting is gift-giving," Lucius began explaining. "You give the person courting gifts. If they accept them, you continue doing so until you feel it's time to move to the next step." Tom nodded. "What's the next step?" "Dating," Lucius said. "You take the person out on dates. Continue with the gift-giving and romantic gestures, but spend more time with them. Take them to see an opera or something they like to do." "That's it?" "Well, that's the long part. The dating stage takes a while because it's the main courting. After dating would be marriage." "I see. Thank you, Lucius. Of course, my lord. May I ask, have you not properly courted Queen Hades?" Tom grimaced. "What I am going to tell you, Lucius, is not to be repeated to anyone. My queen was given to me by the light as an offering to spare Dumbledore's life." Lucius looked horrified. "You accepted?" "I did. If he was so willing to throw away something so precious for such a small price, I shudder to think of what he had planned for my queen if I refused. He is perfect, Lucius. Absolutely perfect. I would have ended the war in an instant for him." "I understand, my lord," Lucius said softly. "What is your plan for the old headmaster?" "He will be kept in the dungeons with his magic blocked," Tom said coldly. "Now, what sort of courting gifts old you suggest?" "That all depends on what he likes, my lord. Something useful or meaningful will probably be best, but I do not even know who your queen is. It would be best to try and speak with someone who knows him. Jewelry is a traditional gift, but I cannot speak for your relationship, my lord." "Thank you, Lucius. You are dismissed." After Lucius had left, Tom thought of what Blaise had told him about his queen. Apparently, he liked to read and was good at art. He was abused by those awful muggles too. Yes. Tom knew what to do. He would capture those abusers and let Hades decide their punishment. Luckily, Tom knew where Hades used to live during the summers. He apparated straight there and burst through the door, stunning the small family of three that sat around the dining room table. The woman was very skinny and had a long neck. She had thin hair and cold eyes. The man beside her was nearly the exact opposite. He was large with barely any neck at all. He had beady eyes and a thick mustache. Finally, the son. The boy looked to be around a year older than Hades. He was tall and muscular, with a strong jawline and handsome features. His hair was a dirty blonde and hung in his face, covering his warm brown eyes. Tom vaguely remembered that the son was innocent, so he treated him with more care than the adults as he apparated them to a cell in the dungeons. He chained all three to the wall and revived them, watching in dark amusement as the two adults screamed at the sight of his glamour. Interestingly, the teenager merely rolled his eyes at his parents. "I'm Dudley," he introduced. "Would you please shut them up?" His amusement growing, Tom waved his wand and silenced the adults. "Ah, that's better," Dudley said with a pleasant smile. "Now, if you could please let me see my little cousin, it would be greatly appreciated." Tom smirked and unchained the teenager. "Come with me, Muggle." Dudley smirked back. "Not a Muggle," he said smugly, following Tom out of the cell and ignoring the horror on his parents' faces. "At least, Hades says I'm not. Can't do magic like you lot, but I can see through glamours and can see the future sometimes. That's how I know my cousin's new name and that you won't hurt me." Tom froze. "You're a seer?" Dudley hummed in response and led the way through the confusing maze, only solidifying Tom's belief that he was a seer. Seers were rare and chosen by Lady Fate, as lords and ladies of magic were chosen by Lady Magic. They were to be treated with the utmost respect. "Mizzy," Tom called once they had left the dungeons. "Prepare a suite for our guest. He is to be treated as you would me or my queen." "Yes, Master Marvolo." While Mizzy prepared a suite, Tom looked the boy over. "Those Muggle clothes are unbecoming of a seer," he declared. "I will have seer's robes commissioned for you." Dudley nodded. "I assume I will not be seeing my cousin until then?" Tom frowned. No, I will bring you some books on seers if you would like, but it's best you not be seen until you are properly dressed. Dudley agreed quietly and allowed Tom to lead him to a newly cleaned and prepared room. Thank you, Marvolo, he said. Might I suggest your first gift be the prisoner that will be brought in later today? Thank you, Seer Dudley. The Muggle name sounded horrible, but he would respect the Seer. Call me Apollo, he said. Dudley is connected to the abusers of my little cousin. Tom smirked. If that is your wish, Seer Apollo, I will ensure that you have everything you need. In fact, Dally. A small house elf popped into existence. Yes, Master Marvolo? Dally, I am giving you to Seer Apollo. He is to be your new master. The bond formed between the Seer and the house elf, and the elf bowed to Apollo. Dally will be waiting for Master Apollo's call, he said before popping away. Dally will come when you call and will follow your orders. If you would also like a wizard servant, I can have that arranged. Apollo chuckled. No, Dally will be perfect. Thank you, Lord Marvolo. Tom nodded in satisfaction. Very well. If you see anything that you wish to share with me, ask Dally to fetch me. He left Apollo alone to get settled and decided to wait for what the Seer had informed him would be taking place. A prisoner that would make the perfect gift. Who would it be? Who do y'all think it is? Chapter 5. My lord, Thaddeus Knott came rushing up to him. Lucius captured a prisoner at the raid. What would you have us do? Name, Thaddeus, Tom chided. Remus Lupin, my lord. The werewolf? Tom asked. Yes, my lord. Is he harmed? Yes, my lord, but nothing severe. He is feeling the after effects of the Cruciatus curse and has a gash on his shoulder. Bring him to the throne room, Tom commanded before donning his glamour and stalking off to the throne room. He settled in his throne and gestured to Lucius, who was waiting for him there, to allow them in. The werewolf was bound in silver chains that clearly burned his skin and had a gag in his mouth. Thaddeus forced him to kneel in front of the Dark Lord before bowing and leaving the room. Tom smirked at Lucius. You have done well, Lucius, he said, rising from his throne and slowly approaching the glaring man knelt in front of him. You will be rewarded. Thank you, my lord. Lupin growled as Tom neared him, but he was too heavily bound to do anything but glare as the Dark Lord examined him. Yes, you will do nicely, Tom said with a smirk. He waved his wand and healed the gash in his shoulder before frowning at the poor robes he wore. Lucius, fetch me a set of silk robes. No werewolf should be wearing such rough fabric with their enhanced senses. It probably feels like sandpaper. Confused, Lucius summoned the robes and handed them to his lord, who then spelled them onto the werewolf, who relaxed minutely. The robes were of a fine silk and were a deep blue color. Tom then looked over the wolf again and nodded. Now he looked like a proper gift. Though, the silver chains probably wouldn't be appreciated. He quickly changed that by transfiguring them into iron ones. What are you going to do with him, my lord? Lucius asked curiously. He will give him to my queen, Tom said smugly. My lord, a werewolf was not what I meant when I suggested a courting gift. Nonsense, Tom said with glee. I have it on good authority that he will make a perfect gift. Lupin glared at Tom even harder, but couldn't do anything about his obvious hatred. My king? Hades entered the room, his servant following directly behind. You asked to see me? I have a gift, my queen, Tom said, gesturing to Lupin, who turned his glare onto Hades. Hades froze upon seeing the werewolf. Moony. All the color drained from his face and he rushed forward, stopping just short of touching the prisoner. Oh Merlin, are you hurt? Confused by the care from the masked stranger, Lupin shook his head slowly. Hades turned to Tom. Let him go home, he whispered. He has a son and a husband who are probably worried sick. Just let him go home. Tom's brow furrowed in confusion. His queen didn't want the gift? Realization dawned that perhaps letting the wolf go was the gift. He looked at his queen and nodded. As you wish, my queen. He turned to Lucius. Release him, Lucius. Lucius waved his wand and unlocked the chains, which fell to the ground at Lupin's knees. The werewolf quickly rose to his feet and yanked out the gag, glaring harshly at them, though confusion lingered in his eyes. "Why?" he asked Hades. Hoarsely. Hades hesitated, so Tom said, "Go to him, my queen." In an instant, Hades's mask was off and he was hugging his godfather. "Go, Moony," he whispered. "Go back to Teddy and Sirius. Stay out of this war." "Cub?" Lupin asked quizzically. "How are you alive? Dumbledore said you know who got to you." Hades scowled and explained what Dumbledore had done. "Dumbledore offered me up as an offering to save his own bloody skin," he snarled. Lupin growled lowly before calming down and asking, "Are they treating you well, cub?" "Better than Dumbledore ever bothered to treat me," Hades admitted quietly. "Much better." Upin turned to Tom and bowed stiffly. "Thank you for taking care of my cub. I would like to officially request a neutral standing in this war for me and my family." "Granted," Tom said. "You and Black are welcome here at any time." Lupin nodded gratefully and hugged Hades one last time before leaving with a promise to bring his husband and son around to visit. Once Lupin was gone, Hades smiled warmly at Tom. "Thank you," he said softly. "It means a lot that they'll be safe." "Of course, my queen. Anyone else that you'd like to be declared safe?" "The Weasley twins," Hades said immediately. "Very well. Lucius, send letters to those two with the offer. Tell no one of my queen's identity." "Yes, my lord," the blonde said before walking out to follow orders. Tom walked away with a large smile on his face. His first courting gift was a success. What next? He decided to apparate to Nocturne Alley, where he went through the stores, searching for the perfect gifts. He might have gone a bit overboard with how many he got, but he wasn't sure how long he wanted this courting stage to last, and he planned on giving a gift daily. He bought lots of books, some jewelry, some art supplies, a pair of ornate daggers, and some other things he thought his queen would appreciate. He used magic to send them all back to his rooms. He was about to leave when he spotted the pet shop. In the window was a large snake with brown scales and a yellow underbelly. He immediately recognized it as the most venomous snake on the planet, an inland taipan. Chapter 6. Hades woke up the next morning to find a large box on his bedside table. Curious, he opened it. "Finally, you've been sleeping forever. Get me out of here, dumb human." Hades yelped but did as told, taking the meter-long snake out of the box. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "A speaker," the snake hissed. Its voice was distinctly masculine. It curled around Hades's shoulders and nuzzled his cheek with its head. "You are mine now." "Pardon? I will be your familiar," the snake decided, "and you will be my master." "How did you get in here?" Hades asked, not bothering to argue with the large snake. "Other speaker sent me." Hades sighed tiredly. Of course Tom had sent him a snake. Why, Hades didn't know, but he had been missing having a familiar bond after Hedwig died. "All right. Do you have a name?" "Not yet. Other speaker said you would name me. How about Asura?" "Acceptable." Hades chuckled. "Asura it is." He climbed out of the large bed and headed to the restroom to shower, leaving Asura on the warm bed. After his shower, he dressed in a nice black robe and finished getting ready. He then sat down to wait for Blaze to bring breakfast at 8, as usual. Sure enough, Blaze entered with food right on time, though he faltered when he saw the large snake coiled around Hades's shoulders. "Where'd the snake come from?" he asked, setting down the food. "Tom," Hades said casually, feeding Asura a strip of bacon. "This is actually the third gift he's given me. It's odd." Blaze snorted. "He's courting you, Hades." Hades's jaw dropped. "Courting me? You have a mate, master?" Asura asked curiously. "In a way, I suppose," Hades responded. He looked up at Blaze. "Yes, courting you," Blaze said, ignoring the parseltongue. "You're his queen. It really shouldn't surprise you that he is courting you." "You didn't tell me you were a queen." Hades ignored Asura in favor of answering Blaze. "I didn't expect it," he admitted. "He already has me, so he really doesn't need to try and court me." Blaise sighed and shook his head. He's trying to do this properly. He wants you to choose him. Oh, Hades murmured. Okay then. He quickly ate his food. What's on the schedule for today? Blaise accepted the subject change easily. You've finished etiquette training, so now you'll be training with the Dark Lord in dueling. Draco is also moving in today, as is Theo, who will be working for Draco like I work for you. Hades nodded and finished his food slowly, so as to not push his limits. When he was done, Mizzy came and cleared it away and Hades stood up. Would you please escort me to Tom's study? Blaise led the way before leaving him to enter with only him and Asura. He knocked lightly. Enter. Pushing open the door, he entered his king's study. Tom, good morning, Hades. Did you like my gift? Yes, thank you. His name is Asura. Tom smiled. Are you ready for training today? Hades nervously nodded. Tom's smile grew and he gestured for Hades to follow him as he exited his study. He led Hades through the castle and to a large empty room. This is where we will train. Will Draco be joining us? Hades asked hopefully. No, Tom said. Draco will be learning the political aspects first. Now, let's begin, shall we? The training was intense, but Hades loved it. The feeling of dark magic flowing through him was comforting and natural. It came more easily than light magic ever had. Throughout the training, Asura was coiled in the corner, calling out words of encouragement as he watched on gleefully. It was lunchtime when they finally quit, and Hades was dripping with sweat and utterly exhausted. Thanks, Tom, he said. That was nice. You're a natural, Tom said in return. Now, I need to begin training Draco, so you may return to your rooms if you'd like. Smiling gratefully, Hades returned to his rooms and hopped in the shower while Asura went off to hunt for some food in the surrounding forest. When he exited the shower, Hades dressed in a new set of robes and sat down to eat a small lunch. After he ate, he grabbed his book on elven culture and continued reading it. He finished it quickly and started a new book, this time about vampires and their culture. Asura returned shortly after, seemingly satisfied. He curled up around Hades's shoulders and fell asleep to the sound of his heartbeat. Hades chuckled and stayed as still and quiet as he could, so as to not disturb his familiar's rest. Sleep well, Asura, he whispered. Sleep well. Sorry for the short chapter. Confused Face Chapter 7. It had been a week since the first courting gift. Every morning, Hades awoke to another gift on his bedside table, whether he saw Tom that day or not. Hades treasured them all. He had never received gifts before unless it was a special occasion, so getting gifts with no special obligation was amazing to the teenager. He loved each and every one of them. After Asura, it had been a book on parcel magic, then it was a pair of daggers. Then a new sketchpad. Every new gift was something Hades could use in some way and he loved it. He hadn't had another training session with Tom since the first one, but he continued to practice saying the incantations so that he would get it right later. He now also trained himself with his new daggers, learning how to fight with them in case he ever lost his wand in a fight. Good morning, Hades. Blaise greeted when he walked in with a tray of food. Good morning, Asura. Good morning, Blaise. Hades returned warmly, chuckling at the disgruntled hiss Asura gave at the loud noise. What are we doing today? Someone is going to visit, Blaise cheerfully informed him. The Dark Lord something about a surprise for you. Hades nodded in understanding. Thank you, Blaise. After eating his breakfast and taking his potion, Hades dressed in the same green and gold dress robes he wore when Tom first came to visit him. He assumed it would either be Draco or Tom that came to visit, so he prepared himself for those possibilities. He very much did not prepare to see his cousin when he opened the door. Dudley? He asked in shock. Hey, Hades, his cousin greeted. It's Apollo now, actually. Marvolo came and brought me here and gave me these robes. Nice, huh? Seer's robes? How did he know? Hades asked frantically. I didn't say anything. Oh, Merlin, I'm so sorry. You weren't supposed to get caught up in this. Apollo scoffed and strode into the room. I told him, Hades. He's destined to save the wizarding world, and I'll be damned if I don't get to help him win this war. Oh, Hades said. Okay. The two stayed and caught up until late in the day, when Apollo suddenly zoned out, staring off into space blankly. Is he okay? Asura asked, nudging him with his tail. He's having a vision, Hades explained. It happens sometimes. Just give him a minute. Sure enough, a minute later, Apollo came out of his daze. Damn, Hades, Draco is hot. What did you see? Just the announcement of Draco being a prince and me being a seer to a large group of people in dark cloaks. We get crowns and everything. You were there too, but you were wearing your mask. Interesting, Hades said thoughtfully. Do you know when this is? Yeah. The ceremony is tomorrow night. Marvolo told me yesterday. Increment Hades sat in his throne beside Tom as Draco and Apollo were each given crowns and declared untouchable. Draco was declared a prince, as Apollo had said, and Apollo was declared a seer. Each were given a throne on the raised dais, and each gracefully sat down and looked out over the mass of people. After the ceremony, they held a meeting. A meeting during which Hades was incredibly bored. He honestly did not care one bit about the war and much preferred a good book to listening to Lucius report on the ministry. What are your thoughts, my queen? Tom asked, his crimson eyes sliding over to Hades. They had been discussing what to do about the order. According to Snape, they were all unified by the death of Harry Potter. None knew of what Dumbledore had done. Or, rather, Hades suspected that the ones that did were pretending otherwise. Hades sighed. As we know that Potter is not dead, at least, not by our hands, we should focus on destroying the faith they have in Dumbledore. If Snape reports back that we are still looking for Potter, then they'll start to doubt that the old man knows what he's doing. Snape's eyes went wide with what looked like hope. You haven't killed him, my lord. If I had, I would have made sure it was known, Tom drawled. Draco and Snape exchanged hopeful glances that did not go unnoticed by Tom, if the narrowing of his eyes meant anything. Might I suggest something? Apollo said with a smirk. Of course. There are a few that would be helpful to our cause. While they would not follow you, they would follow another. Apollo's gaze locked onto Hades. Your queen is in need of an inner circle, is he not? Hell no, Apollo, Hades hissed, glaring at him defiantly. Tom smirked at Hades. Why not, my queen? Hades faltered at the question. He couldn't just say that he'd rather not have followers, as he practically already did, with being the queen of the dark. Scowling, he gestured to Draco. What about the prince? He's the budding Dark Lord in training. They won't follow him, either, Apollo pointed out. They will only follow you. Knowing exactly who Apollo was talking about, and knowing he was right, Hades sagged a little. Fine, he bit out. He waved his wand casually, wordlessly conjuring several sheets of parchment and a quill and ink. He wrote out several letters before magically sealing them so that only the recipients could open them. He handed them to Snape. See that these be delivered. Yes, my queen, Snape said, bowing his head submissively. What do you propose for our next move, Prince Draco? Tom asked. I propose we focus on recruiting and training. Our forces have grown rusty and need to once again train to be the best. If my lord is agreeable, I can work on a training regimen for the outer circle. Not acting publicly will drive the light paranoid until they make a mistake. I agree, Hades said before Tom could say anything. I've seen how the outer circle duels and it is miserable. Very well, Tom agreed. Hades, you will work with Draco on a training regimen. Then, you two will be the ones to oversee the training. Hades felt himself smile at the task. As you wish, my king. Now, Fenrir, how are things among the pack? My pack is eager for the ministry to fall, Fenrir said. Good, Tom said, pleased with the shared sentiment. Tell them that they will also be training under Hades, but their regimen will be altered to suit their unique style. Yes, my lord. Anything else to report? No, my lord. Then, you are dismissed. Everyone left and Hades turned to Draco. "So," he said with a smirk, "where to?" Draco smirked back. "Library." Chapter 8. Fred and George Weasley were stocking shelves in their store when Severus Snape walked in holding a letter. He silently handed it to Fred before walking back out. "That was odd, wasn't it, Forge?" Fred commented as he examined the letter. "Right you are, Gred," George agreed. "What do you reckon it is?" "Only one way to find out," Fred said as he broke the seal and pulled out a sheet of folded parchment. He began to read it aloud. "Dear Gred and Forge, I'm sorry for not contacting you sooner. I'm not dead, obviously, as I am writing you this letter. I am actually rather happy and healthy at the moment. I was given to the Dark Lord as an offering to spare Dumbledore's life. I have been treated well here and greatly enjoy it. I even got a new wand after Dumbledore snapped mine. Anyway, I'm writing you to make an offer. I'm sure you got the offer of neutrality, as they haven't planned any raids on your shop. I'd like to meet with you in person to discuss this. Please come alone. Slytherin Castle, Private Wing, England, hoping to see you soon, Hadrian Potter Black." The twins smiled widely and went to get ready to meet with their little brother. They dressed in their favorite matching robes and shouted the flow command as they threw down the emerald-colored powder. They exited the flow in a grand sitting room and they smiled widely at the sight before them. Their little Harrykins was sitting in an armchair with a book, dressed in very nice robes. When they appeared, he looked up and smiled warmly before marking his page and gesturing for them to sit. He began to tell them everything that had transpired since he had disappeared. When he had finished, George asked, "So, you're a queen now, and you have a snake familiar? Also, you're dark?" "Neutral, actually," Hades corrected. "All right, cool. What's the offer?" Fred asked. "I want you to fight with us," Hades said. "You wouldn't be following Tom or even Draco, but you'd be following me. I'll train you and—" "Yes," the twins shouted together. "Of course we'll follow you, Hades." Hades sighed with relief. "Great. You'll have to report here every morning for training. Here's your uniforms." He waved his wand and summoned 2 identical boxes. Opening them, they found matching black combat robes and half-masks made of pure silver. They grinned at each other and knelt in front of Hades. "I, Fred Weasley, do hereby pledge myself to Lord Hades. Until death do claim me, I swear to follow his every order and put his health and well-being before my own. So mote it be." George repeated the oath with his own name and their marks shimmered into existence. The mark was a lightning bolt on their right wrists. After swearing their oaths, the twins promised to return the next morning and flowed back to their shop with wide smiles on their faces. Increment, the twins had been training with Hades for a few months and were now excellent in all forms of combat, as they were extremely fast learners. There were 2 others they trained with, though they did not know their identities. The first was a girl with pale blonde hair and skin. She always had several knives sheathed on her person. Her silver mask brought out her beautiful blue eyes. She went by Aphrodite. The second was a boy with brown hair and green eyes. He seemed peaceful, but the twins knew he could take them out any day. His code name was Ares. "All right, your official training is complete," Hades declared proudly. "Now, let's have introductions. Aphrodite, you're up first." Aphrodite smiled serenely. "My name is Luna Lovegood. I'm Neville Longbottom," Ares said next. The twins barely managed to keep the shock off their faces as they introduced themselves. "I'm Fred Weasley, but I would prefer we stick with Castor." "George Weasley, but I'd prefer Pollux." Hades smiled. "Perfect. Now that you've all been introduced, it's time to attend your first meeting with the Inner Circle." The meeting was long and boring for the twins, but they did get to introduce themselves as Castor and Pollux found himself watching the boy that followed their lord around. Blaise was handsome and clearly intelligent if Hades kept him around. Pollux wondered if he could convince Hades to let him court the younger teenager. Probably, he could, considering him and his brother happened to be Hades's favorites. Meanwhile, Castor was paying attention to the agenda for the both of them and found that he agreed with many of their ideals. He was finding that all that he had been told about the Dark was naught but lies. The Dark Lord didn't want to kill all Muggleborns. He wanted to make them choose between our world and the Muggle world. He didn't want to waste magical blood when there was already so little of it. Overall, the two twins were most definitely not regretting their switch to the dark side. Chapter 9. Hades paced in his quarters, having an existential crisis. Blaise watched on in concern, but knew better than to try and stop him. It had been a few months since Tom had begun courting him. They had gone on dates and he was still receiving gifts from his king. The gifts slowed down in frequency, but never in quality or thoughtfulness, but that was his problem. Hades had been certain that Tom had wanted him as his queen just to prove that he could have whatever he wanted, and he was still trying to work past that assumption. This mindset was problematic for him because, well, Hades was falling for the man. He was completely and undeniably falling for the man who killed his parents, leaving him to grow up as an orphan. Yet, he didn't care about that. His parents were never a big part of his life, but Tom was. Tom was the perfect gentleman to Hades. He had yet to push him to do anything Hades didn't want to do, save for marking his elites. He always listened to what Hades had to say, no matter what he had previously been doing. The dates they went on were always quiet and romantic, not loud and extravagant. Sure, he was overly possessive, but he had slowly been letting up on some of the restrictions recently. For example, he had allowed Hades to have physical contact with his friends and family when they came to visit. This had earned Tom a happy kiss on the cheek, which he had adored. He had also allowed Hades to go out to the gardens and to move around the castle freely, as long as he had Blaise for protection. It was clear to Hades that neither of them had been in a relationship before. Tom was slowly learning how to not be too controlling, but he very clearly had never courted before, though Hades thought he was doing an excellent job. Hades himself was no expert in relationships. He was too self-conscious and had low self-esteem, but being with Tom had slowly raised it. He still hated his body, but he wasn't about to verbally degrade himself anymore. So, yes, Hades was head over heels in love with a murderer. However, it was war. Tom doesn't kill for no reason and he tries never to waste magical blood, but it had been war. Hell, Hades had killed Quirrell, which made him a killer too. The thought made him physically shudder. "Calm down, Master," Asura hissed. "You're wearing a hole in the floor." Looking down, Hades found he was right. The stretch of floor he had been pacing on was slightly lower than the rest. He plopped onto his bed with a groan. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked dramatically. "Maybe," Blaise began dryly, "you should consider that the Dark Lord actually loves you back. He's been proving it for months." Hades sighed, knowing his best friend was right, but at the same time, doubting himself. "Tom is perfect, Blaise. He is hot and kind and he cares about me. He gives me choices and doesn't expect me to fight in the war if I don't want to. He gives me gifts and spends time with me every day, even if he's tired. How can I ever return that?" "Maybe a kiss?" Blaise suggested with a knowing smile. "A real one this time? You know he won't initiate it." "I know," Hades agreed reluctantly. "I've never kissed anyone before, though. What if I mess up? What if he doesn't like it?" Blaise snorted disbelievingly. "I doubt that. I bet he'd actually be honored to be your first kiss." Hades had to admit he was right, and so, with his mind made up, Hades started to plan everything. He would make sure everything was perfect. Increment. Tom was very much enjoying his relationship with his queen. While he would like to go further, he was happy with what he had. He loved spending time with Hades and seeing him smile. He loved everything about Hades. He was just finishing up his paperwork for the day before he got to go see his queen. He was reading the last report from Yaxley and frowned when it mentioned prisoners. He would have to visit them to make sure they weren't someone that Hades cared for. He sighed and put the report aside before rising. The dungeons could wait. He wanted to see his queen. He strode down the halls towards his lover's quarters and lightly knocked on the door. When it opened, his words got stuck in his throat. Hades was wearing a set of casual robes that accentuated his beauty perfectly. His long hair was pulled back into a low ponytail and he smiled shyly up at Tom. The smile was so demure and made him look like an angel. Not that he didn't usually. "Hi," Hades said softly. "Hello, love," Tom managed to say. "How was your day?" Hades blushed and looked up at him through his eyelashes. "It was good, thank you. How was yours?" "It was eventful," Tom admitted as he settled down, sitting in an armchair that he had put in when he started visiting. "Bella is complaining to me about the lack of raids, so I'm planning on giving her a new toy to keep her busy. Yaxley's group brought in some prisoners to pick from." "Oh? Don't worry, my queen. I wouldn't dream of hurting someone you care for. Would you like to join me in choosing Bella's new toy?" Hades smiled again and nodded. "I think I'd like to know who Corbin caught." Tom smiled and stood again before holding out his arm for Hades to take. Once Hades had his mask on, Tom donned his glamour, walked them down to the dungeons and to the most recently filled cell. "Here we are." Inside the cell were several red-headed men. Two looked bored while the other two looked panicked and scared when they saw Tom in his glamour. "Pollux, Castor, I'm disappointed in you," Hades said with a frown. "You got captured by Corbin." The two looked down shamefully, making the other two look confused. "Sorry, my lord," one twin said. "They caught us off guard," the other admitted with a disappointed scowl. "Just don't let it happen again," Hades said as he waved his wand to release them. He turned to Tom. "Find different toys for Bella. She can have Hermione." Tom sighed and nodded. He looked at the other two redheads. "Names, my queen?" "That's Charlie and Bill Weasley and these are Pollux and Castor. They've been mostly neutral, except Dumbledore is using Bill's cottage with his wife as a safe house. I imagine this raid was on the Burrow?" "Yes. And they didn't catch Ronald or Ginevra. They were at an order meeting with Mum and Dad," Pollux said. "I see. You two, go to your rooms. If you are stopped, feel free to test out that new toy I gave you yesterday." The twins exchanged delighted looks before bowing and skipping out the door, knowing that Hades wouldn't hurt their brothers. "What is going on?" Charlie asked hysterically. Tom ignored them and turned to Hades. "And these two? Put them together in the highest tower and assign Vinny to their care." Tom smirked. "As you wish, my queen." Then, Hades went shy again and leaned up, connecting their lips in a soft kiss for the first time. When he pulled away, Tom was frozen and could do nothing but watch as Hades ran back to his rooms. With his lack of concentration, his glamour fell, allowing the two Weasleys to see what Hades always saw, being keyed into the glamour so he could see through it. He turned to them and glared once he regained his senses. "Not a word of this to anyone," he hissed at the snickering Bill and the confused Charlie. He sent them up to the highest tower and assigned Vinny to them before hurrying to his rooms. It was definitely time to go to sleep, but he couldn't. He lied awake all night, thinking of that perfect kiss. Chapter 10. Hades walked into the throne room with a wide smirk. At his side was Blaise and behind him were his elites. Pollux and Castor to his right and Aphrodite and Ares to his left. "I apologize for our tardiness," Hades drawled, drawing the attention of the inner circle to him. "Someone thought it would be funny to hold us up." He shot a pointed glare at the twins. Pollux and Castor simply smiled innocently and sat in their spots at the conjured conference table, soon followed by Aphrodite and Ares. Blaise stood slightly behind Hades's throne as he sat down. "So, what are we discussing?" Hades asked. "Fenrir was just giving his report," Tom informed him. "I see. Well, carry on, then." The Alpha cleared his throat nervously, causing Hades to quietly chuckle. He had gained a reputation among the Death Eaters that made most afraid of him. It was hilarious, because he had never physically harmed any of them. He just had a sharp tongue and he didn't hesitate to tell anyone exactly what he thought of them. It probably didn't help that his training was so intense. "As I was saying, my lord, my pack has been excelling in their training and are awaiting further instructions. We have not turned anyone recently, as per your request, and they are growing restless at the lack of action." "Your pack," Hades said, rolling his eyes, "needs to calm down. If you ever want the prejudice against all werewolves, and creatures in general, To ease up, you all need to stop behaving like such idiots. Every time you attack a child or an innocent, you only add to the stigma. I can understand wanting to fight and be useful, but if you get all the neutral creatures killed, we'll hardly be accomplishing our goals. So, tell them all to grow the hell up and start applying self-restraint. Fenrir winced at the harsh truth. Yes, Queen Hades. Tom smirked. Fenrir, your pack is now to be focused on recruiting other creatures. Specifically, I want you to communicate with lone wolves and invite them to your pack. Explain to them the benefit of being in a pack and our agendas. Yes, my lord. My king, if I may, Pollux and Castor have a proposal, Hades said sweetly in the voice he knew always got Tom to agree. Tom nodded absently. Of course, my queen. As you all know, Pollux began. We dabble in inventing. Recently, we found, Castor continued, a way to incorporate Muggle technology with magic. Really? Tom asked, looking interested. How impressive. How do you believe this to be of use? Simple, Pollux said with a smirk. It's something the Order of Burning Chickens wouldn't suspect. Castor nodded vigorously. They believe that we consider all Muggles and Muggle-made things to be below us. If we were to use our technology, they would have no defenses. Muggle recording devices are what we're thinking. But we've also been playing around with some Muggle explosives. Very fun things, those. I see. Well then, I approve of your plans, Tom said, sounding smug at the thought of getting one over on the Order. Take whatever funding you need for your experiments. The twins cheered, causing Hades to smile fondly. May I? Ares said softly to Tom, receiving another nod. He stood as the twins sat and began his own proposal. I suggest we start bringing down Dumbledore's reputation. How do you propose we do this? Rabaston asked. Ares's smirk was feral as he replied. Why, I might just know a source that can give us some dirt on him. I'm for anything that hurts the old coot, Hades agreed immediately. We might not be able to touch him, but we can ruin him. Who is your source, Ares? His brother, Aberforth Dumbledore, the usually timid boy said with a confident grin that had a vicious edge to it. He is the owner of the Hog's Head. He knows more about the going-ons of the world than anyone, seeing as he charmed the wood of the building during construction to loosen lips and report back to him. He'd be willing to snitch on his own brother? Hades asked skeptically. Gladly, Ares said. I've spoken to him several times and I know he hates the headmaster. All right. Take one of my circle with you, Tom said casually, waving his hand dismissively. Aphrodite, do you have anything to say? Her lips curved into a dreamy smile. Oh, yes, Lord Marvolo. I believe I know a journalist who would be more than willing to write your articles. Very well. See to it. Anyone else? Actually, my lord, Rodolphus said, I have been meaning to ask. Why does Queen Hades always wear a mask? Tom frowned. You wish to know his identity, he said. He turned to Hades. Are you comfortable with this, my queen? Hades eyed each of Tom's most trusted before sighing and waving his wand to cast a secrecy ward on them all. Story time, I suppose, he said. We'll start from the beginning. The inner circle all leaned forward in anticipation. I suppose, it all began when my parents were murdered, Hades said. I was taken from the wreckage of my old home and given to my Muggle relatives to be raised, despite my parents explicitly stating in their will, which has only recently been unsealed by me, that I was never to go there. The reason for this was because my aunt and uncle despised magic or anything that doesn't constitute as normal in their minds. I grew up in the cupboard under the stairs. I was rarely fed and given only clothes that my cousin had outgrown. I was forced to do all the work around the house from the age of 4. I made meals, cleaned the house, trimmed the lawn, washed the car, weeded the garden, and did the laundry. Until the age of 5, when I attended school, I believed my name was Freak, as that was what I had always been referred to. School was a lifesaver for me. I learned my name and got healthy food once a day. I also found that I was extraordinarily smart for my age. I excelled in everything I put my mind to and I absorbed knowledge like a sponge. I craved knowledge because it was the one thing I could count on. My first case of accidental magic came when I was 5 as well. With it came my first real beating. I had always been smacked around by my aunt and uncle, but this was awful. After the beating, I was locked in my cupboard for a week. As the strange things kept happening around me, I figured out that it was tied to my emotions. I took to suppressing my emotions, and therefore my magic, but it didn't stop the beatings. They only seemed to get worse and worse as I grew older. There were many times that they almost killed me, but my wild magic kept me alive. It kept me from starving when I was locked in my cupboard for weeks. It kept me from dying from my injuries, and it healed them nearly overnight. I was grateful for my magic, then, even if I didn't know what it was. When I was 11, I got my letter for Hogwarts. Rubeus Hagrid came to get me, as my relatives had destroyed all the many letters I was sent. He took me to Diagon Alley and Gringotts for my school supplies. He told me all about how Slytherin was evil and how great Dumbledore was. As he was the first adult to ever show me kindness, I believed him. These ideas were reinforced on the train, when I met my first friend. Here, Hades paused and frowned. He also told me Slytherins were evil. Of course, there was also this one blonde prat that was obnoxiously arrogant that got into Slytherin, seemingly confirming everything I was told. Because of all this, I begged the Sorting Hat to not put me in Slytherin. Despite it being the best option for me, despite belonging there completely, instead, I was put into Gryffindor, where I met Pollux and Castor. Tom was frowning now, as was most of the room. Draco, who figured out that he was the blonde prat, but not who Hades was, looked sheepish. That year, I was manipulated into playing hero. Hades continued. I believed Severus to be evil and started a rivalry with the same blonde prat. Realization and joy dawned in Draco's eyes. He knew who Hades was. Hades continued to describe his time at Hogwarts, vaguely, and watched as the inner circle grew more and more upset. Severus had a small twinkle of recognition in his eyes, but also regret. Everyone else slowly began to realize just who Hades was as well, their eye widening in shock. At the beginning of my 6th year at Hogwarts, I was called to the headmaster's office. He informed me that I was being given to the Dark Lord as an offering to end the war, only that wasn't it at all. I was handed over to save his own skin. I arrived here and expected to be treated like a slave, but I was given nice rooms and food to eat. I was treated like royalty and I didn't understand. That is, until I learned I was to be his queen. My name, Hades said, taking a deep breath and removing his mask, is Hadrian James Potter. Chapter 11. The first to react was Snape, who quickly knelt at Hades's feet. I apologize for how I treated you in school, he said, his soft voice full of regret. I should have recognized the signs of abuse, but I was so caught up in my hatred for your father that I missed it entirely. Hades shook his head. Stand up, Snape, he said. We'll talk after the meeting. Tom cleared his throat. Now that we've got that out of the way, he said, I believe this meeting is over. You are dismissed. Everyone quickly vacated the room until only Hades, Tom, Snape, Blaise, and the elites remained. Hades dismissed the elites and they quickly left as well. Snape looked away in shame as Hades began to speak. I'm not going to lie and say that the way you treated me didn't hurt, he said. I needed an adult to care for me and be on my side, and that could have been you. Instead, I was shunned and mocked. I was beaten and starved. You were so blinded by my resemblance to my father that you only saw him, but I've never been like James in anything other than my looks and my skill on a broom. However, I do not want to hold on to my anger towards you. I forgive you, Snape. I forgive you for the insults, the unfair treatment, the pain. I forgive you for your misplaced hatred and your uncalled for spite. I want to start over with you. Let's put the past behind us and start anew. Thank you, Queen Hades, Snape said, a small smile forming on his usually downturned lips. You are dismissed, Severus, Tom said. Yes, my lord, Snape said, standing and quickly leaving the room. Hades sighed and stood as well, giving Tom a quick kiss on the cheek before heading out the door. Come on, Blaze, we have training to oversee. Blaze grinned and followed Hades out of the room. They went to the dueling room, where the inner circle had gathered to train. Unlike the outer circle, who trained 3 times a week, they only trained together mandatorily once a week. All right. Listen up, Hades called as he stalked into the room. You all know the routine. We'll be doing partners today. Find your assigned dueling partner and stand off to the side. While he spoke, he pulled out a bunch of flashcards and picked out 10 random ones. This was how he and Draco had decided to train the Death Eaters. Each flashcard had a spell on it. The only spells the dueling pair would be allowed to use would be what they got on the flashcards. If they didn't know a spell, then they had one less to use and were expected to prove their competence in the spell at the next session. They would also have to work on their accuracy when casting as well as their physical stamina and strength. They were set on exercises and were made to run laps before each session. They were tested monthly for improvement and received a harsh scolding from Hades if they hadn't improved, something that no one wanted because Hades easily reduced even the most hardened of Death Eaters to tears with his words. Do your warm-ups and then we'll start, Hades said. Today is testing day for you all. Several of the inner circle paled at his words, causing him to smirk. Testing day for the inner circle was different than for the outer circle. Rather than just testing for improvement, they had to duel against Hades. Before becoming queen, this wouldn't have been too much of an issue, as he was not well trained and only knew light spells. However, he had now been trained thoroughly by Tom and knew many more spells and curses, but light and dark, which made him a formidable enemy with his lightning-fast reflexes and incredible battle instincts. The first duo to fight Hades was Lucius and Narcissa. They worked in tandem, one defending while the other attacked before switching randomly. When one began to tire of their position in the duel, they lasted a whole 10 minutes before Hades took them down. Next was Fenrir and Corbin. They were less in sync, but they worked together well nonetheless. Corbin focused on spell work while Fenrir attacked physically, forcing Hades to fight on 2 fronts. They managed to last almost 15 minutes because of their strategy. Everyone else went until it came to the Lestrange brothers. They were undoubtedly the most formidable of the inner circle, save for Snape and Bellatrix, but those two worked best alone while the brothers worked in perfect unison. Rabaston and Rodolphus worked together perfectly and the duel lasted for a full half-hour before it was called a draw. When all the testing was done, Hades smiled proudly at them all. Good work, everyone, he praised. You all passed. Get one with the flashcard dueling now. Rab, Rodo, come over here, please. The dark-haired brothers exchanged smiles before bounding over and bowing low. Yes, Queen Hades? Rabaston asked for both of them. I want you two to start helping me train the outer circle, Hades said. You are both the best pair of duelists in the dark sect and I am struggling to train hundreds of Death Eaters on my own. We would be honored. Thank you, Hades said with a warm smile. Now, go find a pair to duel. There's no slacking allowed here. The brothers grinned as they went and cornered Bellatrix and Snape for a duel. Hades sighed with a smile as he watched the inner circle duel each other with the limited 10 spells each. Some got spells that had to be used creatively in order to be useful, but Hades was impressed with how they managed to do just that. May I have a duel, my queen? Hades turned to smile up at Tom. You may, he said teasingly. Tom was the only one that Hades had dueled so far that had been able to beat him, and Hades relished in the feeling of a fair loss. It was a nice feeling to know that he had someone more powerful than him. A lot of pressure was taken from his shoulders. The duel between them was soon the center of attention as they threw curses and spells back and forth with fierce determination and unwavering courage. They both had very different styles of dueling. Hades was flexible, small, and fast. He jumped and twisted and weaved out of the way of the multicolored beams of magic. He used his size and flexibility to his advantage in dodging spells by jumping and flipping and leaning backwards like he was playing a game of limbo. Meanwhile, Tom was tall and strong. He didn't need to move nearly as much, able to hold a corporeal, one-way shield with barely any strain on his magical core. He dodged when he had to, but he traveled rather than using fancy tricks like his beloved. He had a completely different stance that had him more sturdily planted to the ground and less easily knocked down. The duel was intense and it ended with Hades disarmed and immobilized. Both were breathing heavily and had sweat dripping from them. Hades could feel the magical strain on his, now depleted, core as he tried to escape the magical bindings unsuccessfully. "Do you yield?" Tom asked with a weary smile of satisfaction. Hades sighed. Fine, I yield." Tom released him, catching him in his arms before he could fall to the ground from pure magical exhaustion. It hadn't been the best idea to duel Tom right after dueling all of the inner Seer without rest. "Carry on," Tom said as he carried Hades out of the dueling room, Blaze following behind. "Rodolphus and Rabaston are in charge while Hades recovers." Hades yawned tiredly as he was laid in his bed and tucked in with a loving kiss. "Sleep, my love," Tom said softly. Hades didn't question him and closed his eyes, slipping into a peaceful and dreamless sleep. Chapter 12 Albus Dumbledore. Hero or Villain? It was perfect. The news article that Luna wrote and published in the Quibbler detailed each and every last dirty secret of Dumbledore's, from his sister's death to his secret lover. It read of how he gave away their one last hope to save his own life. It spread the news that Dumbledore was not the kind and grandfatherly headmaster everyone thought. Hades read over the article with a smirk. The Quibbler had grown quite the audience before that article, becoming widely known as the news source for unfiltered truth. Because of this, word spread quickly that Dumbledore was not the perfect Light Lord. "Satisfied, my queen?" Tom asked with his own smirk. The two were eating breakfast together, which had become part of their daily routine. Hades nodded happily and fed Asura a piece of bacon. "Dumbledore's reputation is ruined," he said gleefully. "There's no way he can recover from this." Tom smiled fondly at Hades as he scratched Asura's scales lovingly. "No, he cannot," he said. "The Order of the Flaming Chicken is going to have a fit. We should send Aberforth a gift basket or something to thank him," Hades declared as he reread the article. "Giving us this much information must be worth something." Tom hummed in agreement. "You can put something together, my dear." Hades beamed at him and the two lapsed into a comfortable silence as they finished their meals. Tom had a full English breakfast, complete with bacon. Poached eggs, grilled tomatoes, fried mushrooms, buttered toast, baked beans, and sausages. Hades had a smaller breakfast of bacon and eggs with some buttered toast and a small bowl of fresh fruit. After their meal, Hades kissed Tom goodbye and left to meet with and train his elites. The twins were already in the castle, as they hadn't left since they had been captured. Neville could only come when he wasn't being watched by the Order, since he was the new supposed chosen one. Luna visited often, not being considered as important to the Light's cause as Neville. "Excellent work, APH," Hades congratulated as soon as he entered to find her twirling a knife between her fingers skillfully. "That article was perfect." Aphrodite smiled dreamily. "I'm writing another on my search of the crumple-horned snorkack, if you'd like to read it." Hades smiled at her and nodded. "I'd love to, APH." Ares entered not 5 minutes later with a wide smile of glee. The look on his face was wonderful. He cackled. "Oh, you should have seen it, Hades." He was as pale as a sheet and practically ran from the Great Hall. Hades cheered before sobering and beginning their training for the day. Increment. "How would you like an actual mission for yourself instead of just your elites?" Tom asked the next morning over breakfast. Hades hummed thoughtfully as he chewed on a piece of pineapple. He swallowed before saying, "Depends on the mission, I suppose. I was thinking that you could lead a raid on the Order headquarters. Take your pick of the inner or outer circle and your elites and get as many prisoners and information as you can." Hades thought about it before slowly nodding. "When is this raid planned?" "It's not," Tom said, casually sipping his juice. "I thought you'd like to plan it." A smile crept onto the Queen's lips and he nodded. "I'll take Rhodo and Rab, for sure, along with Pollux and Castor. Snape would be a good addition as well as Bellatrix." Aphrodite has been getting restless, so I'll bring her along. For the outer circle, I'll take. He continued his planning as he slowly finished his food, smiling all the while. After the meal he retreated up to his rooms to write down the plans. He was in the middle of planning when the door burst open to reveal a frantic Apollo. "Hades," he panted. "I had a vision, they're going to catch Ares soon." Hades cursed and stood. "Tell me everything," he said as he began to briskly walk to where he knew Tom would be at the time of day, if he wasn't in his study. Apollo hurried after him. "I was hanging out with Dre when it happened," he said. "I saw Neville tied up to a chair in a dim room. They were trying to force Veritaserum down his throat. There was a newspaper on the table that had the date. It's to happen tomorrow." Hades cursed again and pressed his wand to the mark he gave himself, summoning Neville. The mark would give him 2 minutes to get presentable before teleporting him straight to Hades's location. Sure enough, Ares appeared in his uniform and mask only 2 minutes later. "Yes, my lord. Apollo received a vision of you being discovered tomorrow," Hades said. "You are to stay here at the castle with Pollux and Castor from now on." Ares nodded grimly before following the house elf Hades summoned to his new rooms. "Thank you, Hades," he said before he left. Hades sighed and thanked his older cousin before returning to strategizing for the raid. He would make this the downfall of the order. "Sorry it's short." Chapter 13. Tom smirked as Hades walked into the throne room. His Death Eaters all stared at him as he made his way to his throne. Beside him were his manservants and Apollo. Apollo took his seat on Tom's left, while Hades sat on his right. In front of them, chained and forced into kneeling positions, was most of the Order of the Phoenix. Tom smirked as he looked over them. They had captured them in the raid on their headquarters. The rest had died at the battle at the Ministry when it fell. The war had been won. One glance at his queen and Tom's smirk grew. Hades had a satisfied gleam in his eyes as he looked upon those that betrayed him, knowing that it was his work that had brought them down to their knees before him. "What should we do with them, my lord?" Lucius asked. "My queen?" Tom asked, turning to Hades. The Order's eyes widened when they realized that Hades was not his right hand, but was his queen. "Do what you will," Hades said coldly. Tom smiled and said, "Take them to the dungeons." As they were dragged away by the outer circle, Hades said, "Bella, dear, you can have Granger." Bella gave the queen a delighted grin and skipped off to the dungeons. Her husband, Rodolphus, shook his head fondly. Increment, it had been 2 years since the war had been won and the magical world was better off for it. Muggleborns and Muggle-raised students were given courses on magical etiquette for the summer before they attended Hogwarts, which had mandatory wizarding culture and traditions class, which was taught by Narcissa Malfoy. Hogwarts had many new changes after the war. There were several new classes and teachers, and Tom removed the curse from the Dod opposition, which was now only known as defense, before letting Hades teach the class. Apollo taught divination and did a much better job than Trelawney. Lucius taught the new politics class and Remus taught history of magic after they exorcised Binns. Rabiston took over the new dark arts class, which taught the dark arts to those with dark cores and affinities. Severus took the position of headmaster and Hades was his deputy. Hades loved his job. He loved to teach defense, just as he always had. He was a natural teacher and most of the students favored him above the rest of the staff. He was closer with most of the students than their head of house was, and many came to him with disputes and problems. Tom was ruling magical England as king and had instated a parliament made up of the influential lords and ladies from around magical England, both light and dark. He was a good king and many admired him now that they saw his true means and not the propaganda of Dumbledore. Speaking of the former headmaster, Dumbledore was still alive, as promised, but he was living in a shack and had no supporters any longer. His reputation had been completely destroyed with just that one article from the Quibbler. With no followers, his magic as a light lord dimmed to a tiny flame. He was no longer the powerful wizard he once was. Remus and Sirius lived in the castle with their adopted son, Teddy. Sirius was compensated by the Ministry when Tom took over and no longer needed To work to support his family, not that he did in the first place. Instead, he looked after Teddy and attended his place in the Wizengamot and Parliament. The elites all got their own happy lives as well. Neville was the herbology professor at Hogwarts and the head of Gryffindor House. Fred and George went back to their newly renovated and improved shop and lived happily together there with Blaise, who had officially began dating George a year after the end of the war. Luna was the owner and editor of the Quibbler, which had quickly become the most popular magazine in magical England. Draco and Apollo were dating, which surprised no one except Lucius. Draco was planning to propose soon, something that Hades wholeheartedly agreed to when asked if it was all right with him. Hades and Tom officially got married as well. It was a small ceremony, with only their close friends and family invited. They had their honeymoon in Italy, and they both enjoyed it very much. All in all, most were happy under the new king and queen. Everything had changed for the better and life couldn't be better. And so ends the story of the Queen of the Dark. Let me know what y'all thought about it.